Today we will be looking at SOL 6.5 review, which deals with our base and our exponent. Now if you remember, the base is the big number. When we have our base and our exponent, the base can make you maybe think of the big number, but also it's the number that is being multiplied. So it's the number being multiplied. Whereas the exponent represents the number of times to multiply. The number of times to multiply. So the base is the number that's being multiplied. It's the big number. The exponent, remember, is this little part. It tells us how many times we're going to multiply. So for example, this 2 to the 4th power we could write as 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So the 2 is the number being multiplied, and we multiply it 4 times. Now, sometimes it just asks for our exponential form. Sometimes we want standard form. But sometimes it actually asks us for an answer, like what does this actually equal? And you could actually work it out. 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16. But also we can use this button in our calculator, the one that looks like the YX. If you notice, it's the one right above your divide button. We can do that and also find out our answer. So we would literally type our base, which is 2. You hit the YX button, which says, hey, the next thing I put in is an exponent. And then you hit the 4. Make sure you hit equals. And it takes it a second, and we see that 2 to the 4th power is equal to 16. So we can use that YX button. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that on this review sheet. I want to make sure that stands out. Now if our exponent was a 2, we could use our x squared button, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now when we read this, I read it, if you listen, 2 to the 4th power. Now we have 2 of them that have special names. When you have a number and your exponent is 2, remember we say squared. We say that little 2 means squared. So if we had 4 with the exponent 2, we would read this as 4 squared. And if we had that little exponent 3, remember it means cubed. So if it had been 4 to the 3rd power, we would say 4 cubed. So just 2 of our special names that we have. The rest you just say to whatever power, 4th power, 5th power, 6th power, whatever that is. Now the next thing we need to remember, and I promise there's always a 6th grader that messes this up, is remembering that any number raised to the 0 power equals 1. Doesn't matter what number it is, it equals 1. For example, if we had 1,000 raised to the 0 power, we would type that in the calculator. We would hit our YX button, and if you hit 0, it's going to equal 1. So anything raised to the 0 power, and I made a typo, that should say 1. And I fixed that, as you notice, that it should be equal to 1. So if you want to borrow my whiteout, raise your hand and I can do that, or if you just want to scratch it out, it should equal 1. So 1,000 to the 0 power equals 1. Any number raised to the 0 power equals 1. Now the second part of 6.5 dealt with perfect squares. And I know we've talked about these a lot, but a perfect squares are numbers that result when you multiply a number times itself. Multiply a number times itself. So perfect squares are numbers that result. It's the answer that you get when you do something times itself. For example, if I did 6 times 6. The 6's aren't my perfect square. This 36 is my perfect square. It's the number that we got. If we did, let's see, if we did 20 times 20, we would get 400. That would be our perfect square. And since we're squaring numbers, we could also write this as 10 squared. Does anybody remember what button we use in the calculator? We would use the X2 button, so the one with the X and the 2. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. So it means the same thing. When you see that little 2, it means you think number times itself. X squared is a number times itself. And so 10 squared would be 100, because we would literally think 10 times 10 would equal 100. Now, square roots are kind of the opposite. The square root is this symbol right here that we see quite often. It's this number right here. On your calculator, it has a little X in the middle of it. So it's the button that looks like this, the square root. And the square root's when you can kind of work backwards. If it asks for the square root of a number, it means what number did you times by itself. So if it said the square root of 49, we would have to think what number times itself gave us 49. And that number would be 7. So the square root of 49 is equal to 7. And you can do this with any number that is a perfect square. At this point, you may go ahead and try these 4 problems at the bottom and get them checked before you're ready to move on to the next activity.